Today we discover how worry leads to judgment, and judgment leads to muddy pearls. Don't worry. What that means yet, we'll get onto it, and because we're about to find out. So this kind of all starts off, doesn't it, with that good old-fashioned saying that we have, which talks about don't store up your treasure in heaven. That's been on enough. Don't store up for yourself treasures on heaven, not don't. Store up for yourself treasures in heaven. And that's been on enough fridge magnets and tea towels and stuff like that, in the Christian consumerism kind of world, that we kind of feel pretty good about that, don't we? Whatever we're doing to store our treasures up in heaven. And if you've been raised in the Christian world, you'll be incredibly familiar with what that means. And so in a world growing up with that and being taught about these things, one of the passages that I always had a question about was the cryptic teaching of Jesus in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount about the eye is the lamp of the body. All kinds of things made sense to me, at least on some level, as we went through, I read through the Sermon on the Mount for the first time. But this verse or two, I was like, what? What on earth is Jesus talking about? Well, truth be told, this isn't actually a teaching on the need to see an optician. This is actually something quite different. This is really a well-documented rabbinical Hebrew idiom. It's a Hebrew figure of speech. And one of the things that they would talk about is they would talk about what is called the ayin tovah, which means good eye, or the ayin raha, which is bad eye. So ayin tovah and ayin roha. Raha, not roha, raha. And the rabbis taught that you either had a good eye or you had a bad eye. You either had ayin tovah or ayin raha. And in Hebrew, the thought lies predominantly in our perception of the world. And seeing with a good eye, ayin tovah, means choosing optimism and the best in the situation. It's like asking whether we view the world through a Genesis 1 lens, where God created everything as good, or do we view the world through a Genesis 3 lens, where everything is corrupt and broken. And teaching is powerful and it's fundamental because it relates to ayin tovah and ayin raha, how we teach, how we think and how we view this stuff. It really does impact upon how we view the world. And you can view the story, you can view the world through a lens of goodness, seeing the divine possibilities with ayin tovah, or with a bad eye, ayin raha, focusing on sin and corruption. Now, it's not saying that having an ayin tovah, having a good eye, means that you negate sin and corruption, but it's how do we see things? How do we see God at work? See, how we see the world greatly affects our heart. This is about changing our insides. You remember, we've said this multiple times over the last few weeks. Jesus, through this teaching, through this Sermon on the Mount, has been going after the hearts of the people who are listening. First of all, starting with his disciples and talking to them about like this massive crowd that was gathering to hear his teaching. And they were kind of like going, why on earth are those people turning up and those people turning up? And he's going after the heart, trying to change the heart. Jesus has always been about changing the heart. And Jesus says how you view the world is important. Because of what it does. See, it doesn't just change our behavior. It doesn't just change us on a behavior level and a moral level. It greatly impacts who we are inwardly. And he says, if you have a good eye, if you have ayin tovah, your whole body will be full of light. And you kind of go, what? Full of light? See, many of us tend to focus on the negative, and guess what? We find it. Don't we? We find it, we look, and however, if we choose to seek the good, we can discover that as well. And the eye is the lamp of the body. If your eye is healthy, your body remains well. Now, I don't particularly like that translation because I think it can lead to all sorts of weird, like, theology around health and all that sort of stuff. But if the light that we take in is darkness, that's going to impact who we are, isn't it? And Jesus says if you have ayin raha, it fills you not with light, it fills you with darkness. It fills you with darkness, and that is significant because, you know, we tend to see people incorrectly. And one of the ways we observe this is manifested through the Greek. English doesn't help us here. We need to look at a little bit of the Greek, and you're going to have to, I'm going to have to apologize for my dodgy pronunciations as we go along. But this word, this healthy or unhealthy word, good and bad, the Greek term for healthy suggests generosity, whilst the Greek term for unhealthy suggests stinginess. And if I'm seeing the world in a generous light, if I'm seeing the world generously, if I'm seeing the world positively through a good light, well, that means I'm going to live from a posture of abundance. I'm going to live knowing that actually there's enough. Having a good eye fosters an abundant mindset. I observe the world and recognize the good. God is at work. There is possibilities and potential inspiring me to give of myself, of my time, of my talents, of my treasure. And the rabbis link a good eye or ayin tovah to generosity, viewing the world positively. And conversely, ayin raha reflects a scarcity mindset, leading to feelings of inadequacy and the belief that others will disappoint or harm me, making me hesitant to give and ultimately ungenerous. And I think we sometimes get lost in the middle here because we talk about the eye and light and darkness, and we forget that this section is continuing a whole flow of teaching. This section comes after, are you serving God? Or are you serving money? Oh, sorry, the section after this comes, you know, are you serving God or are you serving money? And we're talking, so we're talking about money. This bit before is, you know, where's your treasure? We're talking about possessions. And these aren't just snippets from Jesus. It's not like a Twitter feed with discontinued tweets. Everything is connected. Jesus says, store up treasures in heaven. You need a good eye. And without a good eye, you won't store up treasures in heaven. You can't serve both God and money. You must choose to serve money or God. Only one posture, only one eye, only one worldview is going to lead you to that posture or to that behavior and to the response that God is looking for. Only a good eye is going to do that. You have to trust. So what is Jesus really talking about here? He's talking about trusting the story. We should be familiar. That's a phrase that we've used in this series since September 2023. Trust the story. Learn to trust the story. He's talking about Genesis 1. If you believe God created a good world and he's not holding out on you, and he's giving you everything you need, then trusting the story, having ayin tovah, is what's going to be natural for us. Not trusting the story is ayin raha. And we witnessed it with Cain and Abel. We've seen it at the tree with Adam and Eve. We've noted it with Noah and the vineyard. And we recognized it in the Tower of Babel. And we've seen what ayin raha does. But ayin tovah is what releases all that, because you don't cling to those things. As you realize the whole earth is the Lord's, and he's got my back, he's got your back, that you're totally loved, totally valued, totally accepted, we grow in our trust of the story. We're going to develop this good eye. And we're going to kind of go, here you go. It's all yours anyway. How many times do we read in the Psalms, the cattle on the hill? We all belong, but how can we give? How can we outgive God? How can we give all this stuff to him? And if you look at verse 25, Jesus starts to address this whole thing, reflecting on Ayan Raha and Ayan Tova. And he says, why? He kind of answers this question, why do I experience Ayan Raha, this bad eye, as opposed to Ayan Tova, this good eye? And it's due to my worries of scarcity. Now, I have to be really careful here because, as soon as you start talking about worry in our world, we kind of go like, oh my gosh, we all worry. Like, I'm going to be made to feel bad for worrying. Am I going to be made bad for worrying? It's not about anxiety. It's not about stuff like that. But like, we get to cast all our cares on Jesus and stuff like that. But he knows this is about worldview. Like, are we living in a worldview that sees the world positively and therefore sees that God is at work, and or are we seeing it negatively and going, there is a scarcity, and therefore we have to other people? We have to exclude people? Or do we have an open table and a welcome? Are we going to look out for the alien, the orphan, and the widows? Because when we have Ayan Tova, we do. But when we have Ayan Raha, when we see scarcity, who are the first people that we cast out? Those who have nothing, because they're easy to pick on. So it's all to do with my worries about scarcity, about goodness, about love, about acceptance. Ayan Raha is linked to worry, but it's a specific type of worry. And Jesus highlights next statement that worry will steal your Ayan Tova, your good eye. You cannot worry and have Ayan Tova. Worry leads to Ayan Raha. And Ayan Raha never leads to generosity. Never leads to hospitality. But only to worry, because it obscures possibility, it obscures goodness, it obscures the potential of people. And so Jesus says, don't worry. And Jesus affirms you can't serve God and money. You can't be anxious about food and clothing while trying to partner with the kingdom. And he brings it down into these simple things for us to understand and bite and hold on to, because we kind of go like, well, yeah, I kind of know all that sort of stuff. But we can heap this as self-judgment about all sorts of stuff. But really, it's about, we've got to grab the world view. See, those two things, they conflict. The kingdom and being concerned with resource, they conflict. And actually it ends up with idolatry. The only way to make heavenly investments and to store treasure in heaven is to see through God's perspective. Which eye do you think God has? Ayan Tova or Ayan Raha? A good eye or a bad eye? A good eye. Absolutely. Tova. Absolutely. Viewing through God's eye means embracing generosity. Is God generous to us? Yeah, absolutely. And as it builds our treasure in heaven, that raises the question, what hinders our generosity? If we reflect, we might ask ourselves why we don't give more of ourselves, of our time, talents, treasure, all that sort of stuff. Is it not worry that maybe we'll run out? Maybe I won't have enough time to go on holiday or buy the food that I want or do the things that I want or stuff like that. Ayan Raha is a scarcity worldview. It's interesting, in fact, Jesus' next teaching addresses worry, which cripples our ability to be generous and stifles our desire to store treasures in heaven. Worry clouds our vision, but Jesus invites us to trust that God knows our need and provides at the right time. When we were going through Torah, we learnt that man will not live by bread alone, but by every word of God. And God knows how to provide what we need when we need it. This wisdom dates back to the desert. He invites us to live by every word that comes from his mouth. And there's no need to worry about clothes. God outfits the earth. We need not fret about our consumption. God feeds the birds effortlessly. And so Jesus invites us to trust the story. And it's just what we said when we began this whole journey. Trusting the story is what gives us good eyes. Does that make sense? Ayan Raha, Ayan Tova, one leads to worry, one leads to generosity. And once you see clearly the Sermon on the Mount, it starts showing this consistent themes from beginning to end. I once thought that as a young Bible student and teacher that it had unrelated chunks. And that's kind of how I would teach it. Kind of talking about different aspects of the kingdom. But over the last decade, I've realized it's not chunks, but one continuous string of thought. So let's pick up in chapter 7, shall we? Where it says this, do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, or actor. First, take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove a speck from your brother's eye. Do not give dogs what is sacred. Do not throw your pearls to pigs. If you do, they may trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces. Seems like Jesus is kind of losing his mind again, doesn't it? All of a sudden we're into more weird cryptic teaching. It was eyes and lamps, now it's dogs and pigs and pearls. And you're kind of going, what? What on earth is going on here? Well, there are many factors that make us think in this passage. And we've learned one thing over time, is that Jesus, he doesn't lose his mind. There's a little bit of a heads up. He doesn't just go randomly on. There's always more going on, and we've lost context, and we've lost the phrases that they used back in the day. So we read Jesus' words, and we kind of get offended by them and go like, what? Or we just go, oh, that's old and dead language. But the Jews often referred to the pagan nations as dogs, which sounds incredibly derogatory, doesn't it? But it was a figure of speech. You might remember there's a story, and we will look at it a bit more in depth, but there's a story about a woman from Syrophoenicia. And Jesus is trying to get away for a bit of a retreat, a bit of prayer time, a bit of time to recharge for himself. And she comes to him, and she's looking for a healing. And she's a Gentile, and she says, hey, will you heal my daughter? And Jesus is like, it's not good to take. What does he say? Anybody remember? Yeah. To take bread from the children and give it to the dogs. And you read it and you're like, man, Jesus, woo. You're calling a woman a dog. You're calling like a whole nation, a whole people group a dog. This is hard. That's a harsh thing to say. But the thing is, it doesn't have quite the same stigma as what it does today. It's like that word mumsa that we introduced when we first started looking at Matthew, which has the connotations of illegitimacy, and is probably best translated as a word I won't use, but we all know if we question somebody's illegitimacy. But it doesn't hold that same connotation. It's a figure of speech that means Gentiles. It's the same with pigs. Hands up, anybody who wants to be called a pig? No? Good stuff. But she embraces it. This Syrophoenician woman, she embraces it, and she comes back and she says, well, even the dogs eat scraps from the table. She's there, she's communicating with him at the same level. She knows it's not meant to be offensive. She just knows that this is what it is. She understands. She's like, yes, I understand you guys call us dogs. I get it. Pigs are similar. One of the Decapolis' biggest exports outside of grain was pigs. That's why when Jesus cures that demonized guy in the Gerasenes, they go into that herd of 2,000 pigs. That's a big herd of pigs. They understand that it refers to this Gentile audience. If you want to look a bit more at this, I think I've recommended Lois I can't pronounce her last name, Furberg's book. So it's Lois, the Louis. That's for, and Terberg is Tverberg. And she has two brilliant books. The first is Sitting at the Feet of Rabbi Jesus, and that was actually one of the first books I read that started making me think differently. The second book is Walking in the Dust of Rabbi Jesus, and in both of those, she addresses these idioms, and she describes the idea of stringing pearls together. And in the Jewish mindset, pearls represent teachings and wisdom, and stringing pearls means connecting various teachings throughout Scripture. It's Torah, wisdom, and rabbinic thought. And when Jesus says, don't throw your pearls before pigs, he says, Jesus states that those who claim to speak for God shouldn't impose their morality on those who haven't agreed to follow it. I think that's quite shocking for us as Christians, because I think we always want to impose our worldview and go, you need to live to this standard, this morality code. See, it's not enough to assert that this is what God says or what I know the Bible to say, to force others to comply. That's not actually how we're meant to treat people. And I wonder how many parents struggle with this. I know I do. I wonder how many friends and college students have thought, oh my gosh, my friend's doing something absolutely awful and horrible. Like, they need to stop doing this. And you tell them and you go like, oh, the Bible says X, Y, Z. And the question is are these people followers of Jesus? If the answer is no, then we should be careful what we tell them, because their worldview is different. They didn't agree to follow Jesus, and we can't apply Jesus' morality code here. We can't take the beliefs that we hold, the convictions we stand by, and present them to those who do not share them. Because do you know what happens? They take them and they trample on them. And they make muddy pearls. Jesus says this, he says, you cannot take Torah and present it to the Gentiles and say, how dare you do this? Because in Leviticus, God says, do not do this. And Jesus says, they didn't sign up for that. They're not covenant people. They never signed up to play by those rules. You cannot take your pearls and throw them before pigs, otherwise they'll trample them. I think parents and older kids, especially adolescents and uni students and stuff like that, are often challenge boundaries, often challenge and push and stuff, and push parents and push us all beyond our comfort zones. And we can often respond with quite harsh lines. And then all that does is that pushes those kids to react poorly and push those boundaries even further. And it actually leads to the opposite reaction that we want, that we long for. And you kind of go, okay, so what are we meant to do, Gav? If we're not meant to enforce a morality code, what are we meant to do? Well, we'll go on to that. When people haven't agreed to follow Jesus, when they're not followers of Jesus, how do we show them How do we invite them in? What are we meant to do? If we're not meant to say, you've got to live this way, what do we do? We can look back a little bit into the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus says, let your good deeds shine so people can see the work of your Father. So people can see the pearls. We can't expect them to wear the pearls, to live by this stuff, because they're not ready for it. But they can see, they can understand what it's like. And instead, we offer our witness. We can live in Shephelah by the city gates and serve as light on a hill and light in the world. Where does that teaching come? It comes in the Sermon on the Mount. Doesn't it? This is all linked. See, when people see the world that we bring them, when they see that we're bringing peace to chaos, and I'm not just talking about lifestyle evangelism, I am full on, let's proclaim the gospel, let's invite people, let's tell people, and all that sort of thing. But there is something important about demonstrating what peace to chaos truly means. It will draw people in. They will no longer be pigs getting pearls, but rather children receiving teaching. And I want to express this without being derogatory to people who are lost, because I get uncomfortable about that, because I don't want to other anybody. We can't do that. Anyway, I immediately went to the dogs and pigs stuff, but we're called to offer something different. And all of this comes when Jesus is actually talking about what? What does he talk about in this passage? Judgment. He's talking about judgment, about judging others. And as I wrestled with the words I was choosing, I disliked referencing dogs and pigs and children. It felt like, well I have pearls and they need it, and all this sort of stuff goes on. And I dislike this notion, but actually it's in Scripture. But we have to be careful with how we do it, because actually what Jesus is talking about is Jesus is talking about judgment, which is new and unrelated to worry, right? No, it's not. It's not at all. And we can tell this because Jesus starts using the same language. When he's talking about judgment, what body part does he talk about? The eye. Absolutely. What's he been talking about through the whole of this? A good eye and a bad eye. And he says, you've got an eye. He says, he talks about planks and specks, and Jesus continues focusing and discussing on the eyes, on the good eye versus the bad eye, and along the themes of worry and generosity, and this topic of judgment. And it's important to pause and consider what Jesus means by "don't judge others lest you be judged." We love to quote this, especially when someone holds us accountable and we feel a little bit got at. How dare they judge us? Don't you judge lest you be judged yourself. And it's always puzzling. You kind of got to ask, am I not allowed to address your addiction that's harming others and seek your wholeness? Can I not say anything if you're not struggling? If you're struggling, rather? Can I not challenge and address you? And I feel like there's all these other Bible verses out there. I say, yeah, you can do. And so how do those things jive with this? And we need to look at judgment. And there are three concepts of judgment in the first century when Jesus utters these teachings that we need to consider really, very briefly. The first concept is civil judgment. And what is civil judgment? Civil judgment is you've got the courts, and at court, especially in our world, there's a judge, and a judge passes judgment. And there's a particular kind of judgment we have to ask ourselves, is this what Jesus means? That we shouldn't, let judges do what they do? Should we tear down our court systems? No, of course not. Jesus isn't discussing the role of judges in fulfilling civil affairs. The Greek term for judgment also refers to discernment, evaluating whether there is something good or bad, light or darkness. And this purpose informs why God provided a tabernacle. He wanted to teach us to discern the holy from the common, light from darkness and right from wrong. Now, we're expected to grow and go beyond that, to learn from the tabernacle, to learn and apply it. And he aimed to teach us discernment, especially when observing a friend ruining their lives or acting destructively. And you don't get to do this with everybody, but if you have a relationship where you get to go up to them and have a conversation with somebody because you're close, because they're like a brother or a sister. I mean, how many people, who listens to unsolicited advice? Hands up. Yeah. Maybe once or twice in your life you might go, oh gosh, I wish I'd taken that unsolicited advice. But usually you're just like, those people. And when someone gives you unsolicited advice, you kind of go like, who are you? You're judging me. But actually, when it comes from a friend, somebody who knows you, who's able to discern, it's different. That judgment comes from discernment. And one of my favorite rabbinical statements is that in the beginning, God separated light from darkness, and that is forever our task as well. Since creation, God has asked us, has partnered with us as his people, as his children, to continue that challenge of separating light from dark, discerning right from wrong, good from bad, truth from falsehood. This is our calling. Now, is Jesus saying it's okay to discern? There's an obvious answer. Yeah, yeah, he is, but that's not what he's talking about here. It had potential, but it's not just about discernment. And I must look at the world and discern what's good and right and holy and pure and common and common and sacred and all that sort of stuff. It's essential, but Jesus likely means something deeper regarding judgment. And in their context, judgment can be seen as discerning something valuable. But if you bring a sacrifice to the temple and wish to redeem it, you must give to buy it back from the Lord. And God will judge its value, which is acceptable for sacrifices, but it crosses the line when applied to people. And quite often that's what we do when we call it discernment. Is we put a value judgment on our discernment. And we go, they're worthy, they're unworthy. Does that make sense? We see it. We see it in our press. We see it in our politics. So there's a final judgment. Jesus addresses our judgments of others, reminding us that only God can assess another's worth. In the context of Jesus' teaching about dogs and pigs, this seems directed at the Jews' temptation to judge the pagan nations. You cannot do that. You, a mere mortal, we cannot decide who has worth. And this language begins to bother me because it can feel really judgmental. But ultimately, I don't get to decide. I feel I'm quite educated. I'm growing in my education, all that sort of stuff. And I could lord it over people and kind of go, oh, they're blind, but I can see. They're not okay, I'm all right. Do you know what? I don't get to make that call. Only one person does, and that's the person with the purest ayan tovah. I can never take that job or duty upon myself. Jesus teaches us not to judge. Don't assess someone and think that person's a pig. I have the pearls, but they're a dog. You can't pass that judgment. Is this a separate issue from worry? I think they're entirely connected. So why do we pass value judgments on others? what's the opposite to judgment? What would you say is the opposite? What? Acceptance, grace, letting them off stuff. So imagine someone is stood before you. They've done something wrong. What do they need? Love, yeah? Yeah. Forgiveness, absolutely. The opposite of judgment is forgiveness. That person that's wronged you, you could either pass judgment on them or you could forgive them. And hasn't that actually been the thing that Jesus has been talking about the whole time? Let me rephrase that. My first question is this: why do we judge others? And what I really want to ask is, why don't we forgive them? What prevents us from forgiving? Shouldn't it be easy to forgive? They've wronged me, but I have Jesus in my heart. And here's my hunch, and it's not something I've come up with. There's a brilliant book by a guy called Dallas Willard. He wrote The Divine Conspiracy, and if you've never read it, let me encourage you to read it, because it's amazing, and Dallas Willard is a far better teacher than what I would ever be. But he talks about how all these ideas flow together. And what did Jesus just talk about prior to this? What was the topic? It was worry, wasn't it? Worry influences our judgments of others. We're concerned about forgiveness because we fear they won't face consequences. If I forgive, they might escape without any restitution or repercussions. We're worried about if we just forgive them, but it's not going to be okay, whoever them is. But what we're saying is that whatever they did to us or somebody else was okay. We can't forgive people. We don't forgive people because we're worried. But what Jesus talks about next actually opens this up for us. So he says this, he says, ask and it will be given to you, seek and you will find, knock and the door will be open to you. For everyone who asks, receive, for one who seeks, finds, and to the one who knocks, the door will be opened. Which of you, if your son asks for bread, will give him a stone, or if he asks for a fish, will give him a snake? If you then, though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him? So in everything, do to others what you would have to them. Nearly speaking tongues on Pentecost, there we are. Do to others what you would have them do to you, for this sums up the law and the prophets. Jesus sums up the law and the prophets by saying it's about people. It's all about people. Again, I used to feel this teaching was just its own separate teaching. We just got done talking about worrying. We just got done talking about judgment. And then we have this passage that says, ask, seek, knock, and God will answer my prayers. But this isn't a standalone teaching. This isn't just just Jesus going, I now want to talk about prayer. So I'm going to tell you how to ask, seek, and knock. And how to get your prayers answers. These are very specific prayers because this whole teaching is all being taught together. You need a good eye. Without it, you'll worry. Worrying prevents generosity and leads to judgment of others. Instead, why not ask God to handle it? Why not ask and seek and knock and say, Lord, I'm struggling. I need you. Help me to forgive. Help me not to bring judgment. And this is a serious prayer request. God is saying that worrying about others' justice is an errand oh gosh, my notes are best there. God is saying about worrying about others' justice is not our place. If you're not receiving it, if they're not receiving what's due, return it to God. And it's not oh Lord, smite them. Go get them. It's not like, where the disciples say, we look and go like, oh, that place is a sinful place. Shall we call down fire like God did on Sodom and Gomorrah? That's not forgiveness. See, what's that last part? He says, God knows how to give good gifts. What father, if a son asks for bread, gives him a stone? God gives you what you truly need. This is all one string of pearls, one teaching, all flowing together. Your Heavenly Father knows how to give you good gifts. If you ask for something, he won't give you what you don't need. No father would do that. So if you're living and you're thinking, gosh, I don't have this ayan tova, I don't have this good eye. Ask, seek, knock, pursue it. It's really easy to stand at the front and go, do you know what, stop worrying. And people who struggle with worrying, go ooh, we're getting at me, how do I do that? So it's not about how do we do it? It's about Lord, create in me this new heart, create in me, help me, Lord, to fashion this worldview that calls goodness, that sees goodness. Let me spot the things that you're doing. Lord, I believe you're at work. Help me see where you're at work. See, today's religious people, we still struggle with the same sins as those who listened to Jesus long ago. We haven't changed much at all. Here are my closing thoughts, you'll be glad to know. We must confront the ways we serve the God of money and where we invest things. We've got to confront that. How we live generosity, what we're investing into. See, I believe worry and that worldview of lack, it destroys our generosity and leads to judging others' worth. Our worldview reflects this clearly. And without political bias on both sides of the current political debate in our country, we are steeped with worry. It's one of the reasons why whenever politics comes up, I'm very, very quick to point out that our politics does not have the answer in the slightest little bit. And if we're looking to a political party to, whatever colour, to solve the problems of this nation, we're looking in the wrong place, because it's all wrapped up in fear. No matter our position, we are burdened with worry when we look at the world, which leads us to judge others. And I found that setting aside this worry helps me avoid judgment. When I get caught up, I enjoy politics. I read quite a lot of what's happening in the world and political stuff and all that sort of thing. But when I get really wrapped up in it, I do. My judgment levels skyrocket. And I worry less and discover more and see the humanity of people and the potential of people when I ask God to help me not judge, to help me worry less about who's in charge. Because ultimately, we've sung it this morning, all hail King Jesus. He's on the throne. His kingdom is at work. We get to shine as lights in the world of bringing order to chaos and demonstrating what it means. If we want to see this nation be a Christian nation, it's not about enforcing a morality. It's about bringing peace to chaos and letting those ripples push out, letting that tide flow in as we connect with people. See, if I can give people the benefit of a doubt, I may work with them. Treat others as you would want to be treated. That's the law, and that's what the law and the prophets are about. I mean, my goodness me. It's such a throwaway line in today's society. What's the golden rule? Kids are told it, still taught it in school. Treat Billy how you would want to be treated, whoever Billy is. But actually, that's what Jesus, he summarizes. He says, this is what all these law and prophets are about. It's about people. It's about trusting the story. Do we trust that God is going to bring his kingdom in fullness? That's why I've banged on about it so much since September 2023. Trust the story. Trust the story. Trust the story. We've got to see this. But this is, not just in the Sermon on the Mount, but this is a continual flowing of strings, but this comes from Genesis all the way through to Revelation, that God is calling us to trust his story, to trust his narrative, that he's going to bring about shalom. He's going to bring peace. And we get to play a part. We get to partner with him and demonstrate that you are a light to this world. It's really the thing that we need to grasp. And but one of the ways that we play that out is through forgiveness. If you remember when we looked at the Lord's Prayer, and we'll pray it very, very shortly. We'll pray it very, very shortly. The line that Jesus added was, forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. And when you look at every other prayer, when Jesus, like I said, I think it was only last week, wasn't it, when we talked about this, when Jesus, he said, you know how to pray. Use this prayer. And then he stuck in that little line, because forgiveness is one of the most powerful things that you can do. On big scales and small scales and all sorts of things. And forgiveness, it defeats worry, it defeats anxiety, it defeats judgment, it defeats so much because it puts it in God's control. Trust and forgiveness go hand in hand together. We get to live this out, folks. And it's amazing and wonderful and beautiful. Like I said, it's not about lifestyle, it is about lifestyle, but it's not about lifestyle evangelism. The whole misquoted Francis of Assisi, who never said this, by the way. Anybody who tells you St. Francis of Assisi says, preach the gospel and if necessary use words, doesn't know St. Francis of Assisi. Because that guy was an evangelist and a miracle working evangelist. But the problem with that lie is that there is a nugget of truth in it. We don't want it to disempower us, but we need orthopraxy as much as we need orthodoxy. If you remember from last week, those hand in hand together change this world, and you will change your world, which will change the world. Another one of my little throwaway sayings. Anyway, let's be people who can see and experience the God whom we can trust as he brings peace to chaos. And allow him to do that in our lives. Amen? Amen.